Okay, so a small disclaimer here. It is for only internal use, so you cannot actually broadcast or you cannot, share. There's a disclaimer here. It's only for the students who are here for their reference. It has no commercial value, so it is just for the students' reference only, and cannot be used for any other purpose. So here we will recap the XML that what we have discussed yesterday. Okay, we'll have a brief recap and then we'll get into the technical things, right? Okay, all right. So yesterday what we discussed was the XML is a kind of data representation, and almost we use it for anything. I mean everything that in modern days, like we are using XML for almost anything. It's not just the data representation, it is more than that. Okay, we are using it for data, we are using it for the user interface, and we are using it as a language. So nowadays, every language is a declarative language, right? So people want to design that in XML so that they don't want to introduce new semantics. So if you're aware of XML, that is well and good, then you can cope up with the new language very easily. So that is the idea behind using the XML. So that means at least in SOA, XML is there everywhere. XML is there everywhere. So that's the reason it is important for us to use the XML, right? And next we discussed is you know XML represents the XML. Basically it uses something called elements, element tags or element start tag and the end tag to represent the data. So let us say if you want to represent the name, so first you will be writing a start tag called name, and then you put a name of any name here if you want. Uh, Let us say scenario, and then you'll be putting an end tag here, right? So basically, the tag of any element will be enclosed in angular brackets. Tag of an element is enclosed in angular brackets, and an element has the start tag and the end tag. So the end tag is angular bracket begin and a slash symbol, and then a name of the element, and then the ending of the angular bracket, right? So here an element may have a data or any text here, and or an element may have sub elements. Element may have text or element may have sub elements as well. So let us say I have something called a student element. This is a student element, and inside the student element I have name, right? So here a student element has no data, no text, but it has the sub elements, and the sub element name here is just the name, and the data value here is scenario, right? And you can also have something like name, you can say course, and so on, alright? And you can have something like this. So you may have more than one sub elements here within the element. So whenever you have an element with the sub elements, this element is called as a complex element. And whenever an element has only the text, this is called text, only the text, it is called as a simple element. Okay, and sometimes an element could be blank, an element could be blank. So either it is a simple element or the sub element, so any of the element could be blank. So when I say that, so let us say you don't have course value of it, so this can be represented like this. So basically this is a blank element, you don't have any data here. And in a similar fashion, so let us say if you have a student element, like a student, and you have no data, Okay, so this is also a blank element. So but a blank element can be represented in other way also. So here in the same begin tag you just close it like this, course and a slash symbol. That means it has no ending tag but also no data. So it is also blank element. So technically there is no difference with the this stuff. There is no difference with the by removing this stuff, I mean, and having a slash symbol. Technically both are same. This is two, I mean, two different ways to represent a blank element. All right. So generally we can have some data here. All right, please. All right. So coming to the standards, the naming conventions and kind of stuff. So the element, I mean, XML is basically a case-sensitive language. It has a difference between uppercase letter and a lowercase letter. And I mean, an element, the opening tag should be same as the closing tag, or the closing tag should be same as the opening tag. But otherwise, it's still XML, but it is not a well-formed XML. So when I say well-formed XML or a non-well-formed XML, what does that mean is a well-formed XML is an XML which can be used or which can be passed by your program, any program, a Java program or anything, so they can identify. But if an XML cannot be parsed or cannot be read by your program, then it is called as a non-well-formed XML. The possible reason for that, there could be a typo here, like you might not have an ending symbol properly, or you might have I mean, unfortunately, you might have ended up like this. Alright, so by looking at the data as a human being, I can understand the first one scenario is a name, and it is just that the ending tag was misplaced. Okay, and I mean, I can identify the course is over, and it is just that the ending tag is misplaced. As human being, I can understand, but as a machine, it cannot understand. So that means it is not a well-formed XML. So there are various reasons that an XML, could be reasoned, with the non-well-formed XML. So the reasons are like whether some mistake here, like some their ending tag is missing, or ending tag is misplaced, or if ending tag is missing here and some opening tag is there, and this is closed. Okay, even this is also a non-well formed XML. Okay, for any reason. So the semantics here, see, the semantics here is whatever the opening tag, you should have the same closing tag with no difference even in the uppercase and lowercase letters. You should have exactly the same name here. And if it is not happening, then it is not a well formed XML. So that means if it is not closed, or even if it is closed with a different thing, or if it is not closed because of some typo in the ending tag or whatever it is, for whatever various reasons, it might be a non well formed XML. Correct? If it is a non well formed XML, it cannot be passed by any of your programming techniques. Either the program is written in Java, .NET, or PL SQL, you really don't care, but a program cannot read it. So whatever, it's just the language difference, but the algorithm could be same, right? So if the algorithm is not working, then it is not working, right? So that is the thing here. So that is the reason basically you must be careful with the closing and ending tags, all right? And that is very much important here. And here coming to I mean the name, I mean these language standards. So basically it is as we know, like this is a case sensitive language, and I mean it has a difference here, and we can use it as a as an advantage here, so for representing a naming conventions here. So I mean these are like the industry naming conventions, most of the industry practice how it goes, and how do they name their elements. That is the important thing here. So inside the element name, you cannot you can use the special characters of only the hyphen and the underscore. You cannot use any other special characters there. You can use either underscore or the hyphen. That is allowed as per the XML standards. And of course there is a big length of the some name of the XML. I didn't check it out, but probably it is 1024 characters probably, I mean, the length of the name probably. But yes, the industry practice that I see at least is you should not go beyond 30-35 characters, right? And also when you are naming the XML, so basically the practice of the SOVA is like, it should be the open source. I mean, it should be a readable format. So why we are using XML? Because it should be a readable format. So when you are using it for the readable format, the XML, whatever the element names that you are using, that should be, easy to understand if someone opens the XML and read it. So that try to avoid using the abbreviations. Try to use only the acronyms of it. So try to use a full name. So try not to use abbreviations until and unless it is very well known in the industry or very much known by anyone. So until and unless don't use that one. But see that if it is somewhere crossing beyond 35 characters or something like that, and instead of like using the whole abbreviation, probably you can use the short names for that. Okay, so I mean, yes, you can use a short names like reducing one or two letters in that and try to use that. Okay, so but try to give a full name in the elements. Okay, that is for the easy readability. And coming to the industry standards, for all the simple elements, I follow the camel case model, camel case notation. It's called the notation. So for all the simple elements, I use a camel case notation. That means the initial letter will be the lowercase letter, and then after every letter in every first letter in the word will be capitalized. I mean uppercase letter. So that is the lowercase. I mean that is the simple a simple element that we are representing, and try to avoid using special characters like what do you say, the underscore, the hyphen, and kind of stuff. And coming to the complex elements, I prefer using initial caps. That means every first letter in the word is a uppercase letter, and do not use any space or underscore and hyphen symbol in between. So everything you can concatenate. Let us say you have student marks, S and M. These are in the uppercase letter, and inside that you have some sub elements. So let us say you have Telugu marks, English marks, something like that. It's just a simple data. So T is again lowercase letter, M is uppercase letter because it's a simple data. So that's at least I follow it in all my applications. So people have their own opinion about notations and kind of stuff, because people say that using the initial caps and the camel case is very much specific to Java, and people who are from the the PL/SQL background, and they try to use everything in uppercase letters. So people have different opinion, but at least I can determine by looking at the name of the item, or something like that. I can see whether it is a simple item or the complex item. And never use the type of the value in the name. Let us say the name is a string value, course is a string value. So do not use something like name string, or subject marks is something like an integer. You cannot use subject marks integer or Telugu marks integer somewhere. So do not combine the type of the value into your name. So you can completely avoid that one. So it is just the attribute that you are representing and not the data, right? So that is the reason, try not to use you know their type names here in the element names. So I say the name is a string, you cannot use name string, something like that. So that is one industry standard that even I follow, right? So now that you know what is a simple element and what is a complex element, what is the industry standard and kind of stuff. Okay, and here the XML document actually start with something called processing instruction, something called processing instruction. So as all you know, for any text document, if you take any text document, not just this document, if you open something in a notepad or something like that, if you open HTML or anything, so you have something called encoding. Encoding means what kind of character set that you are actually using. So yes, in a very good olden days, like we have only ANSI characters, so we don't have any special characters. So your operating system recognizes only the ANSI characters. But yes, now your latest operating systems, the latest devices, that you are using that supports variety of characters. It supports Chinese language, it supports Russian language, French language, or something like that. So basically, ANSI it's an 8-bit character representation, but now 8 bit is not sufficient, and we use 16-bit, and for all the other language representations. Okay, so in that 16-bit also you can use some kind of encoding wherein it covers all the European languages, and you can use some language where it collects all the subcontinental languages, something like that. So basically this is called encoding. Okay, so here by the time of, I mean, since XML is a text file, so you need to tell someone who is reading this document, you should tell them that please read this document in this particular encoding format. So let us say, in your document, if you have some local language characters, and you say that this local language characters can be parsed or can be read by some character set or some encoding format, and you should mention that encoding format, right? So that is very very important here. So these kind of excuse me, these kind of instructions are called as processing instructions. That means a program is going to read this file. So a reader, how to read this XML is going to be your processing instruction. It is not just the encoding format that you have, but it could be anything. All right. So the most popular the processing instruction that you have is the XML. So the processing instruction, there is a syntax for that. You have to put an angular bracket opening and then a question mark, and then you can another question mark here, and here in between you can put any processing instruction. Here you can put any processing instruction. So here I can show you a couple of processing instruction. Just don't mind, I'm opening a JDeveloper. So I'm instructing my parser, or a person who is reading this document. I'm giving an information saying that this is written in an XML language with the version 1.0. So we are using version 1.0, and the encoding here is the language encoding is UTF-8. Okay, but do you see that when which editor that you are using to do this? Notepad. Do you see that? Does a notepad is going to write this in UTF-8 format? No, it uses ISO to some number is there. So that is basically a 16-bit encoding. It is not a 8-bit encoding. So that is the reason, I mean, what happens is majority of your servers are the Unix servers, right? On Unix by default encoding model is UTF-8. Alright, you have written something in XML on a Windows operating system, and you have encoded it in Windows, I mean ISO 253, some number is there. That is a 16-bit encoding basically, and your entire document is written in 16-bit encoding, and you are telling the parser to read it in 8-bit, and the remaining thing is everything written in 16-bit. Alright, so does it going to confuse your system or not? Definitely. So if you use any special characters, definitely it is going to confuse. Until unless you are not using special characters, that is well and good. So if you have all the remaining 8 bits blank bits, then any parser will understand. But if it has no blank bits, I mean no, not 0 bits, if you have anything 1 bit is coming, then it will pick it up. So that is the reason, make sure whatever the format that you are putting here, and the document should be written in the same format. So here the notepad will mislead the person who is reading this document, because notepad will not write it into UTF-8. So notepad is not the right choice here, and you can use something called notepad++. So let me check if I have a notepad++. So I don't have notepad++. So probably you can use this guy, JDeveloper. So at least JDeveloper will write it into UTF-8 format. In some cases, it still uses the other format only. Alright, so this format is very very important. So basically this is called a processing instruction. So whatever you have within angular bracket question mark, you call it as a processing instruction. And now the processing instruction that we have used is what? XML. Alright, so that is the processing instruction that we use. And next thing here is, I mean, if an XML document is given, okay, so a document should have something called a root node. So let us say what is a root node here. Let us say you have one more student here. So scenario 2, some one more student is here. Alright. Okay. So a person who is actually reading this document, okay, reading this document, it's all like, it constructs a tree, right? Constructs a tree kind of stuff. So when you are constructing a tree, what you should have? You should have something called main object, and from there you should have two chairs. But here the tree is scattered. So you have two nodes here. You have two nodes and there is no one person who is actually combining all these two. Alright? So then obviously parsers are going to fail. It is not a human being, but parsers are going to fail. Okay, if you see that an XML document to be well formed and an XML document to be read by one to be parsed by one parser, so then obviously you should use something called a root node. Something called a root node. That means, at a high level you should have only one element. Inside that element you can have multiple elements. Okay, so if you see this document at a high level you have two elements, two student elements, which is not correct. So that is the reason what we will do is we'll use something called student list. Alright, and inside the student list I have multiple students. Inside the student list I have multiple students over here. That should be okay, right? So this should be okay. So if you see, look at the high level. At a high level, how many elements that you have? Only one element. So a tree can start with the first element. Inside that you have two elements. So here at a high level, whatever the element you have, the naming convention for this is either a root node, people call it as a root node, and also people call it as a document node, or some people call it as a root element or the document element. So inside a document, whatever the first element that you have is a document element or the root element that you have. Alright. So yes. And the next thing here that you are going to learn is how to put something called comments. So you have some documentation file that you want to insert here, and let us say I want to describe the student element here inside the student. Okay, so if I describe here, so something like this, is it going to be a well-formed XML? No. Why? Because an element has both the text and the sub element. So some parsers cannot identify that. So with that parser, it is going to be a non-well-formed XML. Some parsers may identify that. So basically, you need something called remarks kind of stuff. For comments. Okay, for comments, we have a special node here called. You have to open an angular bracket, have an exclamatory mark, and have two hyphens here, and then you can give any text, and then after two hyphens and then close the angular bracket. So this one is used for comments. So you can write it in any place, okay, not in the name of the element, okay, inside the element or just the above element. So you cannot write this inside the comment or something like that. So don't do that. So within the name of the within the within inside the data or wherever you want you can use. Alright. So what does this mean is this text is completely ignored by your parser. Person who is reading this text is completely ignored by this. Alright. So let us say a course, or if I need to represent a formula kind of condition. So let us say condition is an element. So just for some element I am for some data I would like to give the condition. The condition is A is lesser than B, and then condition. Okay, basically if you see this, A is lesser than B is a data. A is lesser than B is a data. But what it is trying to see, if you use less than here, and it is trying to see that it is going to be an opening tag. Is it going to be an opening tag or is it a text? See, the less than, are you are you going to open a tag or is it just the data? It's just the data. That means you should escape this you should escape this less than sign here. So to escape this less than sign, you can use escape characters over here. So if you are familiar with the HTTP, HTML kind of representation, this can be escaped with something called ampersand LT semicolon. Okay, or if you have some huge data and there are some less than, some greater than, wherein you fill all this kind of stuff, and altogether, like, so you have, I mean, basically you want to see that a block of text need to be escaped. I mean, let us say all this block of text need to be escaped, like if you have multiple less than, multiple greater than, and some percentage and something like that. So when you want to see that escaping of, some block of the data, okay, at that time you can use something called C data, something called C data. So the C data can be used like this: percentage uh, C data is in uppercase letters, and you can use like this, and then uh, you can use this or something like this, probably this. I'll just check that. Okay. There is a syntax for that. All right. So here is the syntax for representing C data. Right. So here is the syntax for C data. So exclamatory and square bracket and C data in uppercase letter, not in lowercase letter. That means all these characters are escaped, so that you don't need to escape these characters one by one. And whatever the data that you have within this block, all this data is escaped. So you don't need to, escape it one by one. All right. So this is you can use it for C data. So basically, C data is used for what? Escaping characters. So everything will be treated as a string, and it will not try to, parse it as an XML. All right. And this one is what? This one is will completely escape it. I mean, this one it's not even considered for the parser, but this guy is still considered. The SOA is still considered, but it is considered as a data or text. Okay. Even though if you have something called SOA, you can say Oracle SOA 11G. Okay. So here this guy is not going to be treated as a element. So from here to here, what it is going to treat? Text. All right. So the course name I put it as a serial SOA Oracle SOA. It's kind of angular brackets that I put, but still this will not treat it as a element. This will be treated as a string only, because everything is escaped. From here to here, everything is escaped. But the other way of doing it is all less than symbols can be escaped as ampersand LT semicolon. Alright. So you can use all the ampersand symbols for the other characters also. For greater than, you can use ampersand GT semicolon, and there are, you can just Google and things will come. Alright. So this is for the XML, escaping characters and that kind of stuff. And the thing is, a student can have, something called attributes also. Student can have attributes also. So when I say attribute, let us say you have medium. Medium of course is English. Alright. So I mean, if you see here, both the attributes and the simple elements both are holding some text. Attributes and simple elements both are holding the text. Technically there is no difference actually. Okay. So but when to use attributes, and when to use a simple element. Okay. So let us say, I go to the tables, basically, I mean database tables. Okay. So let us say if a table is created with the student data, and you have a serial number, and you have name and kind of stuff. So basically the key, I mean you need a search criteria wherein you want to know all the students with this particular medium of the learning medium or the serial number basically. So when you see the serial number, so automatically when you see look, I mean, if someone is searching for English medium students, okay, then at the time looking at the attribute itself, he can just jump out of that one or he can get in that one. So what does that mean is, let us say a person is looking for only the English medium students. Alright. So here you can see that the student list and student is the main node here, and looking at the medium at the attribute, so he don't need to get into the element of student. You don't want to drill down to the student. Inside the same element itself, he can see that medium is English. Let us say if you have the other medium, he can simply skip that and go to the next student. But yes, what happens if I put here the medium? Okay, so let us say what happens is person has to traverse up to student list and then traverse get into the student and then get into medium, and if it is not there, get out of the student and then go to another student. So it requires one level down and one level up. All right, so that may actually cause some performance here. So, and also basically the business reason, if you see, I mean, wherever the person see that at a business level, not a data level, so at a functionality level or at a business level, and if the object is categorized into these kind of buckets, like English medium bucket or Telugu medium buckets, that kind of stuff, so those kind of things should go as an attribute rather than the element. Okay, but otherwise you can do everything it in a element. All right, so if you see that by the nature of the object, so every element is nothing but what a student is an object, isn't it? Here student is an object, and if you see that this student, I mean the functional wise, not the technical wise, at the functional wise, if you see that this student bucket, I mean student has two buckets of it, one is the English medium bucket, another one is a Telugu medium bucket or kind of stuff, then you can use a medium as an attribute. All right, so that a person who is reading this document, he don't need to drill down to the student level to understand what medium it is, because he is interested in only reading the English medium students. Okay, so those kind of information you have to make it as an attribute. So technically there is no difference in the simple element and the attribute. Technically both are same. All right, but just the functional wise there is a difference here. And thing is, another difference is an element can hold sub element, but an attribute cannot hold sub attribute. An element can hold sub element, but an attribute cannot hold a sub attribute. Alright, so that is one thing that you should understand. So here I remove this medium here, probably and write it here. Alright, and now coming to the quotations. So I mean, for representing the string, you can use either single quotations or double quotation. All right. So let us say here this can be a single quotation also. You can use a single quotation also, and you can use a double quotation also. But when to use a single quotation and when to use a double quotation? What is the industry practice? All right. So generally we use the double quotation. Generally we use double quotation, and here a double quotation can escape a single quotation, and a single quotation can escape a double quotation. That is the thing here. So I can say that, let us say so en hyphen means it is English medium, right? So since I use a double quotations outside, since I use double quotation outside, and this guy will be escaped. That means it will not try to see it as like eng is one thing, medium is something else. So it will treat that eng hyphen medium is one thing, because the single quotation is escaped when it is wrapped in double quotations. Okay, but if you want to escape a double quotation, so in place of a single quotation, if you have a double quotation, what happens? From here to here it is one string, from here you have no string at all. So then you should use single quotations outside. Alright, but when you use a single quotation or double quotation and you need to escape the double quotations or quotes here. Let us say you have a single quotation itself and you want or you have a double quotation here itself. Okay, because somewhere you have a single quotation here and somewhere you need to escape a double quotation. Okay, so overall you have a double quotation, but somewhere you need to escape double quotation also. That time you can use something called ampersand quote, quote and semicolon. That means it gives a double quotation, and single quotation is as usual a single quotation. Alright, escaping a double quotation, inside a double quotation what you have to do? Ampersand quote, quote. So then a semicolon, then it can escape a double quotation. Alright, so end of the day test is what? The text for this is en double quotation mediu. This is a text. Okay, oh, eng, sorry. So here this is the escaping mechanism. Alright, but anyhow you have C data. Okay, so for the especially for the elements you use C data and you can escape double quotation, single quotation, everything. Alright, but yes, if it is in the attributes, probably you should use this way. Alright, so now are you clear what is a processing instruction, what is a comment, what is escaping, escaping a double quotation, escaping a single quotation, escaping lesser than, greater than, or escaping it as a whole block of it. Alright, so any questions here? Huh? Yes, probably yes. You can have multiple attributes. Let us say the location is equal to Hyderabad, or you can have multiple attributes. Having a space, you need to manage at least one space in between. Okay, then only it will be treated here. All right. So the most thing it is worried is UTF-8, and you can probably use a Notepad++ or a rich editor, so than the Notepad, and it has the Edit Plus. So it has, when you are saving the document, it has the option encoding style. So then whatever the encoding style you have put over here, you have to save the document in the same encoding style. So if you have given an instruction to read this as UTF-8, but your document is saved in UTF-16 or some other format, then it may confuse the parser. All right. So that is the important thing here that you need to understand. Are you clear? Okay. Yeah. If you just feel that until and unless it is very much specific, so do not use attribute. People are nowhere modern computing, they are saying that you have very good parsers and they are trying to avoid the attributes and they are trying to put everything in an element, okay, because of some reasons. Okay, but yes, you can use attribute. So whenever you feel that this can be grouped into this bucket or kind of stuff, then you can use attribute. Kind of, it is just the nature of the object. It is nowhere technical related. Technically a simple element and an attribute both are same. All right, so that is the one thing. So this is pretty much the the XML. So and you can have address, you can have something called the address, and you can say that house number, this house number, some house number, and you can have street, street 4, street number 4, and you can have area, SR, Nagar, city, area could be area because it is a simple. So city is what? Hyderabad. Alright. And next is what? Street. And zip. And it will be something like that. Okay. Alright. So basically the text that you have, and you need to pay some attention to this. Alright. So the text and the text limitation here. So if any of the name is coming with a different character set, any of the data is coming with, let us say name, a name is coming with some Chinese character set or whatever it is, then you should make sure the encoding format that you have it here, it supports that character set. But generally UTF-8 doesn't support other than English. So only 56 characters it is as good as ANSI characters. So but just some difference is there, and line and those characters difference there, but otherwise it will not. Right? So but yes, if some other language you are using, make sure you represent that in your encoding format. Alright? And there is one more thing here. By default, if you have any leading and trailing spaces, or leading and trailing, the new line symbols, by the time you read it, by default all the leading and trailing tabs, new line characters and spaces are trimmed. All the new line characters, tabs and tab space and blank spaces all are trimmed. Okay, this is for both leading and trailing. This is a default behavior. This is a default behavior. Yes, you can mention that please preserve my leading and trailing spaces. You can tell also, but by default it will trim. So a person who is reading the name, of course you have, some blank characters here after this and before this, but he will read it as only Sanari. Okay, but if you have some spaces in between, yes, he will read it from here to here. So it will trim only the leading and trailing spaces of your data, not the middle spaces. Okay, it will trim only the leading and trailing by default. So that is the reason you need not to worry if you have, you know leading and trailing spaces, and it will be removed by the time it is reading. As a default behavior of any XML, it will be removed. But yes, for making the space and all, do not give a leading and trailing. Okay, and here it is a XML. Never ever give any space or something like this before this thing. I mean, the starting document, do not give a space. So start it with a processing instruction directly, and in this processing instruction do not use any special characters. Alright, so the version that you mentioned, do not use any Chinese character in the processing instruction, because before the processing instruction it cannot understand how it should tune. Right, and do not give any space here. Okay, so generally the UTF documents, they have some beginning of the message, that means they have some, blank characters before the document, but no XML parser will understand, the blank spaces before your processing instruction. That means do not even give a symbol, a space here in the document, not even the enters or the new line characters. So your document should start with only the angular bracket and directly start with that. But after the processing instruction, yes, you can give blank spaces like this, but don't give blank spaces in the beginning of the document. Beginning of the document should start with, a character directly. All right, so that is the industry practice. Do you have any questions? What condition? Yeah, something like that. So basically, I mean, some data that you are representing here, SOA, Sanari, And basically here the so course name here is what I am trying to enclose in the angular brackets. But when you use in the angular brackets, what it is, it will treat it as an element. So to I mean not to say that, I mean we have to tell the parser that it is not an element, it is a data. I have to instruct my parser saying that don't look for an ending tag for this. So this is not an element, this is a data. So for that, huh, any conditions, anything will be escaped. Anything. It is just the data for you. It's just the data, and all data will be escaped here. So this is escaped here, and this is everything is escaped here. Alright. So we use C data for only escaping. So if you don't want to, if there is only one character here, probably instead of using C data, what you can use? Ampersand LT and ampersand GT, because you have only two characters. But if you see the way long, less than greater than symbols are there, instead of escaping each and everything, we can escape it as a group. This is just the escaping character. Alright? Hell not. We use UTF-8 by default, UTF-8, because our server is running on Unix, and on Unix the default character set is UTF-8. And if you see that your customer is requesting a data and in which the name is coming in Chinese letter, and then you should ask your customer what is the character set that you want to use, and make sure your server is configured with that character set. Right? It's not just that your local environment is configured that character set. So generally, I mean, if you see this thing, I mean, enadu.net or something like that, only an internet browser can open a Telugu font. Some other, browsers, if you take, the Firefox and something like, and that will show in some ASCII characters. Why? Because it is the font is not configured. So font as well as the character set is not configured. Alright. So basically, if you see that a data is coming with some other character set, you should ask your customer what character set is this and what is the encoding format that you are using, and make sure not only your local environment but also the server. You should ask your administrator, the Unix administrator, say that do you support this character set from the operating system. If the operating system doesn't support, can the Java server support? No. So you should ask your administrator to configure that. And if your administrator may come back and say that boss, the Chinese characters that you are giving it is good, but I'm not supporting this version of Chinese characters and I'm supporting the other version of Chinese characters. So, and you need to negotiate between these two guys and see you come up with this is the standard format that we use. Alright. So, but don't mess up with the format. And whatever you are using it here, the server should support that one. And also your editor should support the same thing, so that you will encode, I mean while you are writing the XML also, you will be making sure that you are writing in the same encoding. Alright. So there are some ISO standards, and obviously, and make sure your Notepad++ or Edit Plus has support of this thing, and your server has a support of that. So save the XML in the same format, and your server also should read in the same thing and should mention the same thing here. If you are using Windows, you should mention the same thing. Alright. Is that clear? Okay. So that is one thing important here. And the next thing that we are going to discuss is the namespace. Next thing we are going to discuss is namespace. We need to spend some time for the namespace. Okay. Alright. So let us say like we have the address. So the address is actually with the attributes house number, serial, street, area, city, and kind of stuff. Okay, can we have a different format of the address, like address with the line 1, line 2, and just the country code or something like that? Can we have? Hmm? Both are actually same, but a parser cannot identify address, which address that you are representing. Okay, so assume that you have two systems, one is cbel and one is apps and something like that, and one is using different format of the address and one is using a different format of the address, right? So can you actually identify which format are you actually using it, some kind of identification. So that is very much important here. Alright, so let us say inside your server also, so you have different format of the addresses. One is the address with house number, street, zip, state, and kind of stuff. Another one is the address with just line 1, line 2, line 3, and then country. Alright, so you have different formats of the address. And how does the reader should read it? Either format 1 or format 2? How does the reader should read? Do you have any idea about this? You have no idea about it, correct? So that means we should give some identification. You should give some identification for the element. Address is what? Is an element or not? It is an element. So we should give an identification for the element, so that both the person who is writing the XML and the person who is reading the XML has a common understanding. Person who is writing the XML and person who is reading the XML has a common understanding, saying that the address you should use this format, and while writing and while reading you should use this format. Alright, format in the sense this structure you should use. So both the reader and the writer should have the common understanding. That common understanding here is the namespace. Common understanding is the namespace here. Okay, it is as good as, like, let us take a table. Okay, you have a student table. Okay, you have, let us take a student table in two different databases. Two different database means two different schemas. Okay, one is like app schema and one is like custom schema, and both have tables, probably with a different structure, probably with the different structure. But when you are representing the table, you will also represent the schema. When you say apps dot student, it has the student structure within the app schema. When you say custom dot student, and custom dot student has a different structure here. Okay, so basically the schema name here is the important thing here. Schema name will give you where it is located. That means what is the identification of that. And in a similar fashion, you can use identification here like that. Okay, it is just an identification. It is not exactly same as a schema, but the purpose is very much similar to that. All right, and now what could be the common understanding between a reader and the writer, and what we can use as a common understanding? So anything you feel that unique, that can be used here. So anything, both the reader and the writer, they feel that is a unique, both the reader and the writer. Okay, so these parties should identify the string or whatever the namespace that you are giving, that should be uniquely identified. That should be uniquely identified. Let us say if both the writer and the reader are using the same sequence number, can a sequence number be a namespace? Yes, isn't it? Because both are using the same sequence number to uniquely identify that. Let us say if both are using some jargon, some, let us say some this jargon which is uniquely generated by your system. Okay, so let us say people are using this as an algorithm for generation. So can this be a namespace? Can this be a namespace? This can be a namespace, because anything which is uniquely identified, you can use it as a namespace. Alright, so basically this is like you have some algorithms called GUID, globally unique identification, and UUID, universal unique identification. So these are various algorithms which can generate a unique number. So with the combination of your network MAC address and your current time of the system, and there are various algorithms for that. Okay, so with that it can give you a unique number. Okay, so if you use GUID or UID, it is unique across the world. I mean, if you go to any network, this thing, any electronic instrument, and that is unique across. All right, and if you use, if you go for shopping mall, they have ISB codes and these kind of codes. Even that codes also unique. Okay, and anything you can use as a unique thing. Okay, but tell me, what is the motive of XML? If I use some number here, so can someone interpret what this number is? Can someone interpret? No. So cannot interpret whether it is GUID or UID or what exactly it is. You cannot. It is yes, it is a unique, but it is not readable by anyone. But what is the motive of XML? What is the motivation of the XML here? A person if open XML with a naked eye, he should be able to read it. I mean the document XML document should be readable. Okay. And now tell me, what do you feel that unique in the IT industry, at least a human readable, I mean, if a person can see that, can read this and can identify that, okay, this is the unique thing. And what could be something like that? Just throw some example.
Just anything.
Anything you feel unique. And by looking at that, people should see that it is unique. And the person should be able to read it. What is such that?
Identify.
Anything, tell me. Can be an email address. Isn't it readable? Yes, readable. Isn't it unique? Yes, unique. Can I use email address? Yes, you can use. Alright. But yes, email is very much specific to a person. It is very much specific to a person. It's personalized. Okay. I mean, if you say that HTTP URL, it follows the folder structure. Let us say HTTP colon a company name slash the department slash some business arc and slash the object name. So it has the slash and kind of folder kind of structure, so that I can group all the objects which are related to training department to a department name by slash training, a folder kind of structure, right? So can it form a uniqueness, a full URL? Can it give you a unique this thing? Yes. So now the competition here is like a globally generated unique ID or any sequence number or your email ID and the URL that you want to use, and which one you feel much better, which one you feel much readable. hmm? A URL is much readable and makes sense over here. Alright. So URL in the sense not directly the URL, the format of the URL. URL in the sense what? Not directly the URL. The format of the URL will give you the unique format and it is easy to understand, and you can also have the grouping kind of stuff. And all the identities related to the training department you can group it. But in the email address you cannot group that. So I mean it has a slash structure, that means a folder structure kind of stuff. So that means it is easily readable and you can easily organize them. So basically, do you expect that if I give a identification, do you expect that if I copy paste that in a browser, it should render some document? Or do you expect that, or are you just using it as an identification? What is your purpose here? What is your purpose here? So let us say I have my name. So my name is the unique thing. Do you expect that if I put my name in a Google or something like that, do you expect some data to come out there? It is just a unique format. It's just a unique name that you are using. So you really do not expect that. So in similar fashion, even though you use a URL, you are not expecting some data should come out from the browser. Why? Because you are just using it as an identification, just to remember it, just to remember as you are using it as a formula. But you are not really expecting something to come out of the browser if you copy paste this. Okay, that is the reason it is not called as a URL, universal resource locator. It's not a resource locator, it is a resource identifier. That means you should use it as a URI. You call it as a URI. It is a resource identifier, it is not a resource locator. If it is a resource locator, an absolute data should come out of it. If it is an identifier, it is just the identifier. You cannot expect anything to come out from the browser. Alright. So I mean basically we have an industry convention for complies to all these policies, and it should be easily readable, and you should have something like something in mind that you cannot render, you cannot expect that the browser should render something like that, and on that, based on all this information, and we can derive a formula to define you know a URI, and which can be used as a namespace. All right, so the formula is simple here: http slash slash, and the first thing I use is as XMLNS, that means XML namespace dot your hostname. Hostname could be sanari.net slash your org name, okay, slash department slash subdepartment slash some technology slash now the object. So this is a formula that I should use. Okay, of course the department and all these are optional, and if you have things then you can use it. If you say if you don't have sub department, probably you can avoid that one. How I can write here is, let us say if I want to represent a student of a scenario, how I can write it is, example here is http xmlns sanari.net slash a training division here, and inside the training the department is SOA, and inside the department I can say some batch number, if you want I can use, but otherwise I can use. And now the technology, for what technology you are identifying it uniquely, XML, right? For the XML technology you can use it as XML or XSD, whatever I want. And what is the object? Student. And the same thing, like if you are defining it for address, probably define it as address. Or if you feel that something is common at elements, common attributes, you can use it as common. So basically the address is there everywhere. Address is there in the student, address is there in the faculty, or something like that. I feel that it is common, it's not specific to student. So then I can say that such kind of common things I can put it in a namespace called common. Correct? So this is what that we can use. These are the various examples. Alright. So now basically you can use a number, an email ID, a sequence number, of course your timestamp. A timestamp is also a unique thing, right? So you can use all these things. But which one do you feel readable, and which one you can use it? So a URI, not the URL. So difference between URI and URL is what? URL means you can expect if you put it in a browser some data will come, but URI means you're just using it as an identification. Not necessarily be a folder by name training. It is just the organization name and the department name I am using. Alright, and this is the object name. Alright, that is the namespace here. And most importantly, the thing here is, you need to understand one thing is, by the standards of XML, it is not mandatory that any XML element should have a namespace. It is not mandatory as per the XML standards. Okay, an element may have the namespace or may not have a namespace. Alright, but as per the SOA standards, as per the industry practice that we are using, we are not using any XML without the namespace. Any XML element without the namespace. Of course, both the elements may have the same namespace. More than one element may have the same namespace, but yes, we should have a namespace. Without that, the problem in SOA is, a huge amount of XML data is coming here, and huge formats are coming here. So a format cannot be identified by just the file name of it, because some data is coming out from a file, some data is coming out from database, some data is coming out from an XML and a TCP IP socket. You cannot really define. So that file name is no more an identification for the element, only the namespace. So that is the reason the namespace is the only way to identify a uniqueness of the element, the structure, unique structure of the element. There is no other way of it.
Even for the system.
Anything, because XSD is the reader, XML is the writer, something like that. Person who is reading, he will read according to the XSD. Person who is writing, he will also write according to the XSD, but he will just write the XML. Alright. So basically for both you should use the namespace. So in SOVA world, in the world of SOVA, without without using a namespace, very less chances are there. But if you are using an XML without the namespace, it is you are in danger. You are in the danger zone. Alright. So let us say if a customer has a database or customer has an XML saying that he is using some legacy system, some old systems, and he says I'm not using a namespace. Alright, but still you should accept it. Then what I would do is I would take that XML and I would use a dummy namespace. Say that common, instead of common I use dummy. Alright, some namespace which represents dummy. So I will assign the namespace for that, then I will accept it. And then whenever I am giving the data to the partner, and I will remove all the dummy namespaces and then I will give. But the processing will be done with the namespace, right? So that is one technique that you should use, right? In SOVA world, any XML you should not accept without namespace. This is very dangerous, right? Because the other parsers, the other systems are identifying the structure of the XML based on the file name of the XSD or something like that. But here the structure is coming from various sources. The metadata is coming from various sources, not just the file name. And it is coming from a database, it is coming from a network socket, or it is coming from various channels. So that is the reason a file name is no more unique here. So that is the reason we have only one way of representing unique, that is a namespace. So that is the reason in SOVA world namespace is mandatory. Alright. So but as per the XML standards, it is not mandatory. As per the XML standards, namespace is not mandatory. But as per SOVA standards, namespace is mandatory. Alright. And now, and what kind of, I said every element should have a unique, an identification. So should it be like, what level of unique identification that you should give? Alright. So do you mean to say that a name should have a different namespace and then a course? Do you see that? Or let us say the house number should have a different namespace, street should have a different namespace, area should have a different namespace, and address should have a different namespace, kind of stuff. Or very optimistic or very pessimistic. There are two reasons here. So there are few companies, they say that whatever the XML data coming from their company, they will put it as only one namespace. Let us say the namespace is http sanari.net. That's it. Whatever the damn XML is coming out from their organization, it will have this namespace. Okay, it is what? Too optimistic or too pessimistic? Too optimistic. Alright. So if this is the case, you cannot identify what, yes, the organization is good, I understand, but what object in that organization? So you cannot easily identify that. So basically, the decision of making a namespace, whether it is to be too optimistic, too pessimistic, there are some certain guidelines here. You cannot be like too optimistic. Rather, you cannot be too pessimistic, saying that I have a student and slash name is one thing and slash course is one thing. This is what too optimistic. Alright. So basically, how do you justify? You see it as an organization, and you see that up till this XML, SOVA, it is one training department. And in this department, in the training SOVA department, what are the major business objects that you have? What are the major business objects that you have. And these are all the coarse grained objects. These are not the fine grained objects. Means not a low level information objects that you are representing. You are representing the high level objects. So one thing in SOVA that you should act upon is you should act upon the coarse grained objects or coarse grained activities. You cannot go into a fine grained activities or fine grained objects. When I say that one, transfer of the funds from account A to account B. This is the SOVA action. But in turn, it has credit of one account and the debit of one account. SOVA doesn't care the fine-grained activities of it. SOVA cares only the high-level objects, high-level activities. Let us say, you have the address element. Yes, this is the address element. Inside the address, you have serial number and call the other objects. We don't care that one. So we'll represent it as a whole big object. So always in SOVA, you will play with high level objects and high level activities. And if you feel that it is running a way behind low level, then you should outsource it to the technologies like PL SQL, Java, or some technologies. So don't care that one. Why is so? Go back to our previous diagram where the SOVA is playing. SOVA is playing at the low level of the components or on top of the components? On top of the components. On top of the components, what you are trying to build? You are trying to build a business process. You are trying to build a business process. In the business process, you always treat that, okay, create a purchase order. He will not tell that create a line item of this and kind of stuff. He will represent it as a purchase order as an object. Alright? And he will say that create an address. Address as an object he represents. He will not tell that create a line here, line there, and house number, and he will not give you that level of detail. Alright, so you are playing with the high level objects. So let us say if you split that purchase order, and in your table you have the master table and the child table, or the header table and the child table. He will not give you that level of detail. He will tell that purchase order is a purchase order. It has the line items, it has the header information, everything inside. Right? But you should represent it as a purchase order. So now we will take that as a motivation here, and we will drill down the namespaces only up to the high level objects. The namespaces are drilled down up to high level objects. So you cannot further split. Alright, you split up to only the high level objects here. Now here in this, what are the high level objects? Student, address, and these are the high level objects. Okay, not the simple elements are not the high level object. Sometimes even the address is also not a high level object. Okay, so in your training SOVA department you have so many common objects. Out of that common objects, address is one of that. Address is one of the common objects. You have several common objects. Alright, so those things, even sometimes even a complex type may not be a high level object. It may be a low level object. Let us say unit of measurement, and the unit of measurement, inside the unit of measurement has kilograms and liters and kind of stuff. Do you mean to say that since the unit of measurement is a complex element in which you have kilograms or liters or something like that, since the unit of measurement is a complex item, do you give a namespace for that? No, because unit of measurement itself, it has no business meaning of it. A business meaning has as a element, purchase order. Inside the purchase order line item or goods basically has the business meaning of it. So basically unit of measurement has no business meaning of it. So basically you should see from the business perspective, and till what level you can bring it down. And this business object may be used by your SOVA, or may be used by some other web service, or may be used by someone else. You really don't care. Okay, so you should always consider only up to the business level, and you cannot further split or you cannot further drill down, and you cannot be too optimistic saying that for the entire organization or for the entire department I use only one namespace. No, you cannot. So you should always map to the business use case and the business objects. You cannot map to technical things when you are defining the namespace. Alright. So now what are the high level business objects that I have? Student and the address. Of course address I can put it as a common namespace. Okay. So these are the namespaces that we should assign it to the elements. Alright. So when I say the student namespace, all the elements inside the student namespace, that means so a student name and course, and if you have subject marks, and all the sub elements of the student will share the same namespace of the student, and all the address, let us say the address has serial number, street, area, and everything. All these elements will share the address namespace because those are belongs to the address. So that's somehow we should do it here. Okay, so those things we'll discuss it tomorrow. All right, how to apply these namespaces to the elements, sub elements. There is a little trick over here, and I will tell you that.
It's different from the prefix.
I will tell you that tomorrow. Okay, it is just have a business meaning of the namespace. Tomorrow I will tell you the prefixes and everything.
Be able to see the namespace applied to individual elements and as well
I will tell you
as
that tomorrow. It is, I cannot tell you in one single word or one single sentence. So I will elaborate that tomorrow because I have very less time, only 5 minutes. So in 5 minutes I cannot complete that namespace prefix.
tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow I can take 15-20 minutes for that, and then I can tell you what it is. Alright. So any questions here?
Basically, on the whole, now we are it's like almost